Hi. So, I'm going to do a demonstration. um, Pastel. I'm working on sanded paper. I highly recommend sanded paper if you haven't tried it. It allows you to get a lot more pastel on the paper so that I do a process of mixing colors extensively, and this allows me to do that to I can get like 23, 25 layers of mixtures of color, mixing them in on sanded paper. And on regular paper like, say, Canson, it's more something like 10 or 12. So highly recommended sanded paper. Here's the subject. I don't remember where this is from. I found it in my photo collection. I don't often work from photos, but this just seemed like an easier way to do this exercise. I just set out some preliminary colors to just start to block it in, get a sense of the direction the painting wants to go. And then here's my whole set of pastels that I'll be drawing from as well. So I'm just going to jump in. I'm going to start with this mass of trees, and I'm not going to really draw so much as just lay in the color, massing in the color. So starting with this mass, it seems to come to about here. And then it moves in a kind of pinkish direction, the color. So I'm going to put some of that in over here. Then there's another little pinkish piece about here. In this top part, I'll start with, I'm going to start with, I was thinking I will start with something warm. I'm going to start with this, up in here. When things are in light, I tend to want to find the warmth in the color before I start to put in the coolness of the color. Yeah, that's what always happens, isn't it, with pastel? You drop them, and they break. And these guys aren't cheap, you've probably noticed that. So you see, just blocking it in. I'm not trying to be precise at all. I'm not very worried about having this color be accurate yet, but just starting to throw in some colors and get a sense of where this wants to go. I tend to try to use harder pastels in the beginning phase. and then move to the softer ones as I develop the color further. It's fun, I like to paint this way where I'm just blocking in the shapes and colors and not really doing any drawing. With line. It's just pretty fun. So at this point, I realized that I couldn't complete this demo in 20 minutes and at the same time explain what I was doing. So I realized I had to just focus in on the painting. I also realized I was going to have to paint a lot faster. So I had a couple of pots of coffee, and this is then how fast I could paint after the coffee. You probably noticed that I started out with pretty wild color, pretty saturated color, and then I started mixing other colors into it. And about this point, probably it's starting to make a little more sense in terms of color. The reason I start like that is because this is an approach I learned from Henry Henchy, uh, who was a student of Charles Hawthorne, who Hawthorne was quite enamored of what the French Impressionists were doing and ended up going out to France along with many American painters at that time who were quite taken with the approach that Monet and Renoir and the rest were doing. So he painted along with them, and Monet never taught, but he did invite artists to come and paint with him. And so after watching and painting along, Hawthorne started realizing that he could teach this and he was starting to understand it. And so he came back to the States and started the first school devoted to color seeing, which is really just a simple term for what Monet was doing. And around, this was in Provincetown in Cape Cod, and it was in 1899 that he started it. And so it's based on the understanding that it's more the proximity of colored shapes that determine the effect of light. What does that mean? I mean that if we're trying to reproduce light, then the effect of light, we have to understand what we're looking at. And prior to Monet and the Impressionists, most everyone painted with a tonal approach, meaning an emphasis on light and dark. Instead of doing that, Monet started realizing through closer observation that it's actually uh, not just a shift in value. In other words, a tree in the sun isn't just light green and dark green. And he started noticing that there were all different kinds of greens, yellowy greens, orangey greens, violety greens. Um, and in the shade planes, he started noticing bluish greens and violety greens and um, purpley greens even. So the recognition of this is what allowed him to create a much more convincing depiction of light, which is why he did these different studies of like the haystacks to show how the very same subject of the haystacks would change colors as the day progressed and also as the weeks progressed and seasons progressed, and that became his fascination. So that's really a description of what Impressionism was. is. And so Hawthorne, in understanding this, began to teach this at his school. And Henry Henshey came along about 1920. He was about 20 years old at the time and quite a prodigy painter. He quickly became Hawthorne's teaching assistant, and together they further refined an approach to teaching this way of seeing. So you can see in starting with just the raw color, it's then a process of moving systematically through the painting. If you remember, I started at that mass of trees right against the water on the top of the lake there. And then I worked my way to the top and then came down from there and with this raw color. And then came back to that same area and started adding or mixing in other colors. So it's not an underpainting process. It's just a matter of mixing the color in stages instead of trying to mix the color exactly what I see on those trees right from the beginning. It's more building the color incrementally with the whole painting, the awareness of the whole subject, because that's really what it is. In order to capture the light, I'm orchestrating all these different masses of color and trying to work them coherently together to depict the experience of looking at that subject. And so it starts out with very wild color, and then as you see, it develops more and more to a refinement to get the color closer to how I see the subject. And it's orchestrating the relationships of the color. It's really impossible to try to duplicate exactly in pigment what we observe in nature. So we can't really expect that, but we can expect to begin to see the relationships of the masses and capture that relationship more clearly. So that's really the whole process that I've been uh, working with in probably the last almost 40 years, working to develop my eye to see this and then find these color relationships in my pigments. So it's not an end, there's not an end point to it. It's kind of an endless development, endless process of development. You're always seeing color in a new way as your eyes become more sensitive to the colors of nature. Well, I hope this has been interesting and um, maybe even helpful for your own journey. Uh, and thanks for the opportunity to do this um, and for paying attention. Okay, bye.